Welcome to your quick review on Introduction to Intelligence. We're going to go through this rather quickly, guys, because most of this you have heard. We just have a couple of slides at the end that we need to cover. Make sure that you understand the definition of intelligence and what it means to be a socially constructed concept. It means that it's not a real thing, but because we believe in it, we make it real. And that's where the term reification, which will come up in the next slide, talks about. When we talk about an intelligence test, it is going to be any kind of test that is going to measure a cognition or some form of mental aptitude. So that can be memory, that can be logic, that can be problem solving, and the list can go on and on. You need to know the formula for IQ. When we get into assessing intelligence, we'll talk about this again. This is what we'll call a ratio IQ here, the mental age divided by chronological age times 100. And again, if you were the most average of average, your IQ would be 100. When we're looking at it from the bell curve, or what we'd call the normative distribution curve, 68% of people fall between 85 and 115. A standard deviation for IQ is 15 points, with 100 being the average. And here you have again the idea of reification. It's not a real thing, but because we give it importance, we treat it as real. Make sure you're good with factor analysis. This term will be found again when we get into personality testing. Factor analysis is simply taking a very large concept like intelligence or personality and breaking it into its subcomponents. So here we'll say things that underlie that one kind of behavior. It's the factors. So for intelligence, it might be mathematical, it might be verbal, it might be your ability to be creative versus analytical. But again, the different factors that make up your overall intelligence. As we talked about in class, make sure that you know Charles Spearman. He was one that looked at factor analysis, but more important, he's tied in with the G-score. G-score is a single intelligence score. Thurston didn't feel that this was going to be as expressive enough of someone's abilities, so he created a score that had 7 separate factors. Those factors would have been broken down on fluency, verbal comprehension, as you can read in front of you. But again, he felt that 7 separate scores would be far more informative of a person's ability levels than a single G-score. Kanazawa in 2004 said that mental abilities and intelligence, all these things cluster together in an individual, and that intelligence can be academic, but it can also be evolutionary in how you deal with interpersonal issues and that type of information. Guilford was roughly around where most of us ended. Guilford looked at the fact that he felt that there were more factors than what Thurston had actually originally proposed, and so he got it up to about 180 independently operating factors for intelligence. And he used what he called a three-dimensional cubical model. A lot of this just kind of gets into more minutia than what you need to know. He looked at operations, content, and products, but within these 3 major dimensions, he had 180 independent operating factors. Eventually, it fell in on the weight of itself. It was just too specific and too much. You guys should remember Gardner. You had a 40 studies reading on him. If you need better information, go back to that 40 studies because we have to cover this quickly. Gardner used savants to prove his theory. And again, savants would have been like the video of Derek Paravancini, where you see someone who has a very limited ability to function in life, a very low IQ, but has an amazing skill set that transcends that of the average person. So he says that we can't say that they're not intelligent because they have this amazing ability. So maybe intelligence is compartmentalized. Gardner does this back in the 1980s. This leads into a huge amount of impact in the education system. We start looking at where children or students excel, maybe considering that they shouldn't all be, perfect in everything. Some of that has started to go away where we start to assume that all students should be A students, and that's just not true. We do have our particular skill sets that we're more adept to than other people. Make sure you have a general idea of what these are. Linguistic, language, wordsmiths, poets, journalists, logical, mathematical. They're going to be the people who look at numbers, science. You're really good with the scientific method. You're scientists, you're mathematicians. Musical, people who can, in their heads, bring 17 different pieces of musical equipment together and compose a song that really does work harmoniously, or even the people who can just hear tone and quality and play an instrument. The last ones that you need to know, spatial. These can be your cartographers, people who actually create maps. It can be a sculptor who either builds out from clay or takes away marble and finds the form within. Bodily kinesthetic, your dancers, your athletes, people who have superior movement or control of their body. A really good example of this would be an Olympic gymnast. Intrapersonal versus interpersonal. Intra, you know yourself. Inter, between you and another person, you're able to read other people well. And the very last one is a naturalist. This is that Darwinian one, biologists. They're able to look at the ecology of something. They can look at the outside world. They're kind of not in touch with nature, but they see the natural kind of connection with things in biology. It is important to look at success as not just being a measure for intelligence. Usually you think people who are successful are highly intelligent. There's a big difference. Intelligence can help predict later job success because you often have a greater skill set. However, when you start looking at what truly makes you successful, there's a term called talent, and then we know what talent is, but it's the term grit that really kind of makes it important. If you're conscientious, are you aware of due dates? Do you understand how things are going around or are happening around you? Are you truly aware of what needs to be done in your job, and are you willing to do it? Being well connected, that seems unfair, but knowing people can get you an interview, you can get you the job. But continuing to be well connected, knowing who to talk to, having resources, all of those things make you a better employee. And then being doggedly energetic, doing a little bit above and beyond what is necessary makes you someone people want to work with, but even more so makes you somebody people want to hire. And when it really comes down to it, you're the person that person wants to give that bonus check to, that raise to, the things that continue to allow to build success. It comes from that as well. After Gardner, we have Sternberg, and I personally like Sternberg's theory better than Gardner's. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. This one just resonates better with me. He, instead of going with 8, said that there were 3 categories of intelligence. He said it was analytical, creative, and practical. Analytical would be a well-defined question with an absolute correct or incorrect answer. Who was the first president of the United States? Well, if you're looking at that one, the only possible answer is George Washington. How do you put out a grease fire? There's only one possible answer to that. You deprive it of oxygen. Yeah, I mean, it really just kind of, is there a one correct answer to it? Creative intelligence, this is literally looking at a problem and finding several different ways to solve the problem, not just the traditional way. And then practical, this is your everyday sort of stuff. If you were left out in the wild, could you survive? Do you have that kind of knowledge? And for me, that just kind of compartmentalizes it differently. And I see that as more of a personal preference. I like the triarchic theory a little bit more than Gardner's. Creativity. The thing that you should pull from this is people who are creative don't necessarily have exceptional intelligence. In fact, it is a weak positive correlation. Know that statement. There is a weak positive correlation between intelligence and creativity. You actually have to have intelligence to be creative. You have to have a expertise in something to be able to create something from it. But being highly intelligent doesn't make you highly creative as well. Sternberg looked at that and said that there were 5 components of creativity that you should have. First thing I already mentioned was expertise, being able to actually have the basic building blocks of whatever it is that you're going to improve upon. Then imagination, and people usually confuse imagination with creativity. A little kid comes to you with a picture of a flying machine that can eat dinosaurs and you're like, wow, that's really creative. No, that's really imaginative. They can't physically create that object, but they could imagine it. So have expertise and imagination, you might have the ability to truly create. Then you need the personality. You need to be somebody who's willing to overcome obstacles. And I think a lot of us have heard the Thomas Edison, how many times did it take him to create the light bulb? And he tried, or he failed 900 times, but he only needed to succeed once. Venturesome personality means you are going to fail and fail and fail. But like anyone who's truly ever been successful, you continue to learn from your failures until you got your success. You need to be intrinsically motivated. You're not doing this for anyone other than your sheer desire to create, to make this thing. It's because you're interested in it. For me, I always go back to the Wright brothers for that. People told them over and over again what they couldn't do, and they were driven to do what they imagined they could. And then a creative environment, and for Each individual, that might be different. It might be a quiet area where there's very little noise and a lot of solitude for one person, and for another person it could be a bustling, noisy, colorful environment. So creative environment does not necessarily mean lots of color, lots of noise. It depends on the individual. Last slide. I told you guys I was going to go through this fast. Social intelligence. This is your ability to know how to interact and manage yourself in social situations. Everyone has met somebody that they have felt did not quite get it. They didn't know how to respond to people. They didn't know how to understand jokes or something like that. There was something off in their social intelligence. A subcomponent of social intelligence, think of social intelligence as a big umbrella term, is emotional intelligence. And that's your ability to understand other people's emotions and your ability to express proper emotion back, to assimilate emotion, all of those sort of things. They think it's a critical part of social intelligence, but here's the big whammy of it all. A lot of people don't really think that social intelligence should be a part of overall intelligence, that maybe this is actually just a part of emotion and that they are separate. For this class, kind of see them in both lights. It's not something that has been defined. And remember, if intelligence is a social construct, then we can add emotional intelligence into it, or we can exclude it from it, which is why there is this question about whether or not social intelligence is too much of an extension. This should cover the introduction. When we get to class, we'll talk about assessing intelligence. You will have another, hopefully short video about the environment versus the biology of intelligence. So I will try to get that out to you guys today as well.